Ethiopian Christians have long venerated a group of ascetics from various cities in the Roman Empire who allegedly journeyed to late antique Aksum. These saints were known, or these holy men were known as the Tis'at Quddusan, or Nine Saints. They are credited with establishing the first monasteries in Ethiopia and converting much of the country to Christianity. While the stories of individual saints might vary in some details, on the whole, they tend to follow a predictable narrative structure. Each of the holy men begins his life in Rome as the son of a prominent Roman family, who then abandons his parents, and sometimes a marriage as well, in order to pursue an ascetic life. After completing his training, he journeys to Ethiopia, either alone or in the company of other saints. After performing a variety of miracles, the saint then passes away, usually in the company of his disciples. Today I want to focus on the 16th century recension of the Gedal Aragawi, as published by Ignazio Guidi, which follows the life of one of these saints, Abba Aragawi. Even a cursory reading of the texts about the nine saints and Abba Aragawi in particular reveal that few, if any, genuine indigenous memories of an Aksumite past are preserved, and the narratives, when read as a whole, make little chronological sense. But the mistakes that they do make reveal much about how medieval Ethiopians understood their own past. I ask the following brief question. Why did the author of the hagiography believe that Abba Aragawi, at the age of 40, was able to study under the famous Egyptian saint Pachomius, who died in 348, and still have time to meet Aksumite kings who lived in the 6th century, making Abba Aragawi at the very least over 150 years old? A simple appeal to misunderstanding, miraculous thinking, or out-and-out falsification will well satisfy the positivists in the room, or the Zoom call, I guess. The authors of this hagiographic text, and many others like him, were engaged in competitively constructing the historical narrative of Ethiopia's Aksumite past by defending their own particular claims to legitimacy. And their construction did not line up with extant historical evidence. And there's really nothing revolutionary about that claim. But what follows from this is truly fascinating to me, namely that the way in which the author extended the life of Abba Aragawi and the Nine Saints suggests that medieval Ethiopian Christians understood themselves as in some way deeply integrated into the wider Christian oikumene, or inhabited world. I think just one moment is sufficient to make my point, and this is the training and initiation of Abba Aragawi as a monk. In this text, Abba Aragawi is the first of the saints to spend his time as a disciple of the famous 4th century Egyptian monk Pachomius. This, however, is, as I'd mentioned, not chronologically feasible. When Abba Aragawi found Pachomius in Upper Egypt, Pachomius is described as being immediately taken by his piety, and he accepts him as a student. After a lengthy period of training, and having passed all the necessary tests of character, so classic training montage, Aragawi, now 40 according to the text, stood before Pachomius. Pachomius then dressed him in his new uniform, the eschema, and said, "May God bless your eschema," as he gave his blessing to my father, Abba Anthony and Abba Makarios. The Pachomian moment in the life of the holy man is significant because it creates direct continuity between the Pachomian monastic tradition and Ethiopia's own, a kind of international legitimization. The link to Pachomius supported the monastic bona fides of those who claim to follow in Aragawi and Pachomius' footsteps, through a mode of argumentation that genealogically links the Egyptian saint to the holy men of Ethiopia. Genealogical arrangements of monks are a common sight in Ethiopian monastic texts, using the same language of begetting that permeates the Old Testament, so that when Pachomius initiates Aragawi, the author asserts that it is Pachomius begetting Aragawi, and he refers to him as my son. This genealogical link is marked by the ritual birth in which the elder monk dresses the initiate in his monastic garb, and by doing so, bestows upon him spiritual authority and the direct support of God. This ritual is so central to the idea of the legitimacy of Ethiopian monasticism that in other texts it is extended beyond the Nine Saints and Pachomius to the 3rd or 4th century and 4th century to Anthony's time as an anchorite. In much the same way that Pachomius dressed these holy men in their eschema, initiating them in the monastic life, Anthony is described in an 18th century Ethiopic text as initiating himself in this monastic tradition by reflexively donning monasticism with the aid of the archangel Michael. Aragawi's Gedal continues this genealogy through his disciple Matthias, and the line produces such indigenous monastic superstars as a Jesus Moa. The point of this brief discussion of a single part of a single text, which I should also add, may not be considered medieval at all, depending on how you break up the chronology, is to point to something important about the Ethiopian memory of its own past. If we understand this Gedal as one small part of a wide-ranging contemporary discussion, debate, and polemic about the legitimacy and genealogy of a variety of Ethiopian religious and secular institutions, it is at once it is at once obvious and striking that a medieval Christian Ethiopian would seek to associate Pachomius with their own monastic institutions. It's obvious not only because of the long history of contact between Egypt and the Horn of Africa and Christian Ethiopians, but also because most monastic communities throughout the Mediterranean world would leap to lend their founders an air of Pachomian legitimacy. And in this pan-Mediterranean context, it is precisely this mundanity of this retroactive Pachomian association that makes this passage so spectacular. The use of a Pachomian genealogy as an argument of legitimacy suggests that other medieval Ethiopian Christians, even if we're only talking about a sort of narrow class of ecclesiastical intellectuals, found this argument compelling. And I think this points to something deeper than mere Ethiopian knowledge of a wider world and its history, however flawed it may be. Rather, it suggests that some medieval Ethiopian Christians saw themselves as part of this wider world and understood their own monastic institutions and indeed their religious institutions as a whole to be descended from and important to the world's Christian oikumene. All of this is to say that what the medieval turn might offer Ethiopian Christian history is a clearer articulation of what place the wider world occupied in the Ethiopian mind, especially as research into contacts with the wider world continues to grow. And I guess I'll do a plug here for a good friend and sort of someone I admire a lot. Verena Krebs's Medieval Ethiopian Kingship, Craft, and Diplomacy with Latin Europe. Ethiopian history in the Aksumite, Zagwe, and early Solomonid periods must be pulled from the margins and understood as a constituent part of the medieval Christian world, a world that in recent years is beginning to expand far beyond the bounds of Europe and Western scholarly study. Medieval Ethiopian intellectuals were not only aware of the Christian world beyond the African highlands, but saw themselves as participating in it, and constructed and reconstructed memories of their Aksumite past as in such a way as to emphasize this integration into the world. And so I think, then in sort of the 21st century state of the scholarship, we've now sort of fully shed the notion of Edward Gibbon's slumbering Ethiopia, which is forgetful and forgotten. Of course, through such an approach, we stand to lose some sense of the indigeneity of Ethiopian Christianity, of the way in which local material, social, and political conditions affected Ethiopian Christian outlook, and this can't be ignored. But what the medieval turn might encourage is a sort of synthesis of these two outlooks, one in which Christian Ethiopia is shaped by its near neighbors in Africa, and the other in which its intellectual gaze is fixed to some degree or other on the wider Christian oikumene. Well, I don't know exactly, to be honest, what this sort of synthesis might look like as of yet. I believe that without such a synthesis, we fail to fully understand medieval Ethiopian Christianity, both in its domestic setting and on the world stage.